everyone, and welcome to Hit and Hustle from IrishSportsDaily.com. I am your host, Greg Flammang, and with me, as always, is Jamie Uyeyama, Mr. Jamie University. It is Thursday, February 13th. We're going to talk more about Notre Dame's roster heading into 2025. We're going to talk the portal guys and how they kind of fit in. When each one committed, we kind of did like a little quick thing on them. We want to go a little bit deeper into the portal additions and what they're going to add to the football team next season. And talk a little bit of returning production for Notre Dame as well. They are very well set up in terms of who they have coming back. Obviously, there's a big hole at quarterback that they need to get sorted out. But beyond that, Notre Dame is well positioned to make another run next season to the football playoff. Hopefully, make a deep run like they did in 2024. So thank you, everyone, for tuning in today. If you like what you hear, please hit the like button. Please hit subscribe. Please hit the notification bell. So whatever it is, we are going live. We want to hit 10K subscribers before spring ball starts. We're about 450 away from that. So if you could subscribe to our channel if you haven't done so, let people know you like our show. This is a show not a lot of people, I think, know about it. Let people know. That would be great. The show, as always, is brought to you by ESQ Clothing, founded by Notre Dame alum Ge Wang. You've seen ESQ on all your favorite Notre Dame players and coaches. With over a decade of making the best custom clothing available, ESQ will help you look and feel your best in 2025. From a perfect fitting suit or sport coat, shirt or bomber jacket, or the perfect tuxedo for wedding season, check out Ge's amazing work at esqclothing.com. Book an appointment to upgrade your wardrobe today. Mention ISD and get 10% off your entire purchase. Jamie, Texas hired a secondary coach yesterday. That came off the wire. A lot of people were concerned. It's the Rutgers cornerbacks coach. His name is escaping me. Jamie, can you pick me up on that?
No, I actually forgot.
We're not picking each other
I'm
up.
not.
You know
no,
what?
But all I know is his name isn't Mike Mickens.
It's not Mike Mickens.
His name isn't Mike Mickens. Yeah, that's pretty much. I mean, I think everyone just kind of saw that and was like immediately, well, it's not Mike Mickens.
Not Mike Mickens.
Sigh of relief. But I mean, as you can kind of see, like Texas just lost their running backs coach today, right? Like to Tashard Choice, we talked about briefly, the other day. He is off to the Detroit Lions. Is going to be their running backs coach. So there's still like coaching carousel stuff out there. It's not like completely out of the woods yet. I would say it's getting towards the very end, right? We're getting toward the clock is almost hit zero on it, right? Because the other thing is like a lot of these teams too. The NFL Combine's coming up, and they announced the guys who were invited to the Combine and all that. Like that's something where most of the time everybody's staff is in place before that, right? So that's something to kind of think about. So unless Mike Mickens or someone else in the staff goes to an NFL team, it's probably the most likely thing that is the staff right as it is right now will be the staff.
Yeah, and look, I don't want to make declarations on these things, of course. But it looks good, right? Like there just aren't that many jobs that are going to be even an option for, or not an option, but like something that Mike Mickens would be interested in. Like I think Texas would have been, right? Like that's something that's intriguing. They're obviously a SEC team, perennially in the playoffs and things of that nature. So we'll continue to monitor things there. Speaking of the Combine, Jamie, Matt Freeman, Irish Sports Daily's Matt Freeman had posted a tweet about 8 former Notre Dame players invited to the 2025 NFL Combine. Riley Leonard, Bo Collins, Mitchell Evans, Howard Cross, Riley Mills, Jack Kaiser, Ben Morrison, and Xavier Watts. So there's a lot going on for Notre Dame at the Combine. That's great. You put out a post today on 6 Thoughts on a Thursday. And listen, Jamie, I know you don't like this, okay? I know you don't like this. I'm going to pump up my guy, Mr. Uyeyama. 6 Thoughts on a Thursday today was a banger. I encourage everyone to go to IrishSportsDaily.com and check it out. It's good information on the roster. It's very topical to today's show. And you talked about Dane Brugler put out his top 100. 2 players on it. It's safety Xavier Watts, I think at 46 or 45.
Yeah, 46.
46, yeah. And Ben Morrison at 55. Those are only two players in the top 100. Their opponents in the college football playoff, considerably more than that, which I think kind of speaks to how young Notre Dame's top-end talent was last year, right? When you look at Leonard Moore and Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price and KVA and Bryce Young and players like that, Drake Bowen, Adon Schuler, and on and on. So that portends for Notre Dame heading into, it portends well for Notre Dame heading into next season. But that's just something that I thought was interesting. Any further thoughts on that, Jamie?
Yeah, like I think that is something that you could look at. The initial thing to look at is you say like, man, Notre Dame, like, well, I kind of hate the idea of the, culture beats talent. I don't know. It's pretty hard to beat talent when it's like, it's like you can have a good culture. You got to have talent too. It's got to be both.
I mean, I think culture can beat similar talent.
Yes, very, very much so. If you got a better culture and the talent is close to even, hey, chances are you're going to win that game, right? But I think there's a lot of this idea that if you have better culture, that's going to lead to everything. Well, I'm going to tell you, Notre Dame didn't just win because of culture. They had a bunch of studs on the team. I just comparatively to other Notre Dame teams that have had, since I've been covering the team, that they've had, 8, 9 guys getting drafted in a year. Like this team, I think top to bottom was more talented than just about every team, just from top to bottom, especially, right? Because, the 2015 team had a ton of draft eligible talent, but all those guys were they were gone. And that's one of the reasons why they fell off hard in 2016. There was other reasons, but that was one of the things, right? So, and first of all, thanks, Greg, for those kind words. Appreciate it, man. I think what that kind of says about them only having 2 guys is that a lot of the guys are young and aren't yet at the point where they're going to be drafted. They're just not draft eligible yet, or they have third year guys, like a Jalen Sneed, like an Emil Wagner, that will probably, they're getting there. They're in that next space where maybe next year they'll be talked about as draft prospects, or even they still got a couple years left, both those guys, if they want to, right? And so there's that kind of thing. And then a Billy Schrauth is another guy, right? But you have all that, but think about all of these guys that are on the team that are, freshmen and sophomores from this year that were guys who were big contributors on the team. Think about, these are just the freshmen: Anthony Knapp, Aeneas Williams, Leonard Moore, Bryce Young, KVA. All those guys played over 200 snaps this year, right? And I wrote about this because this was something that I just randomly, especially in the off season, I go and look at kind of things just looking at numbers, looking at things indicators of things, if you can help predict things or project things going forward. And one of the things that I was looking at was I made a cutoff of 200 snaps. If guys play 200 snaps in their second year, right? So their sophomore year could be a redshirt freshman year. If those guys if you play 200 snaps, chances are, as a sophomore, chances are you're going to end up being a pretty darn good player. You're either going to be a multi-year starter or an NFL draft pick. Yeah. And then a lot of those guys too, even who aren't, multi-year starters, whatever, they at least get a cup of coffee in the NFL, right? Most of those guys. So from 2017 to 2020, they had 27 guys who were in that 200 snap club, right? There were sophomores there that, played 200 plus snaps. And, 16 of those guys end up getting drafted. 5 others were guys who were multi-year starters. And Tony Jones wasn't a multi-year starter, but he ended up making the NFL, and he's been he's made a 53-man roster.
Yeah, he's been around the NFL. He was around the NFL for a few years.
Yeah, and he rushed for over 800 yards, in his season as a starter. He obviously was a good player, right? So, so 22 of the 27 were hits, and then if you take out And then if you look at it, the next 2 years, you add in guys like Michael Mayer, Joe Alt, Blake Fisher, Mitchell Evans, Riley Mills, Audric Estime, Chris Tyree, Clarence Lewis. And even if you look at like Tyree and Lewis and say like, oh, they're not at the same level, those guys, they're still pretty good players.
Yeah.
They're still pretty good players and definitely contributors. Lewis obviously was a multi-year starter. He led the team in snaps in 2021 or 2022, right? So there's a lot there, or 2021, sorry, but there's a lot there where you're looking at, and there's some other guys who are on that list too that were there: Ramon Henderson, Jaden Thomas, Tyler Buckner, Lorenzo Styles, and Logan Diggs. Well, 3 of those guys transferred. Some of the other guys, Kevin Stefferson was one of the other guys. Obviously, he was a pretty darn good player. He transferred, whatever. He had some other things. But if you're playing at that level, if you're there and you're earning snaps at that time, things are going to be pretty good. So 75%, so 30 of the 40 guys end up being kind of hits for Notre Dame. If you take out the transfers, right? If you take out, guys like Buckner, Styles, Diggs, and you look at like Tobias Merriweather, Holden Stays, Jade Mickey, Sam Pendleton, who are other guys who are transfers, like, going forward, who are like, pretty good players, but just they didn't stick around long enough to kind of see what they would have become at Notre Dame, and part of it is where they were, the depth chart there and stuff too. It's 30 of 36 guys are hits, 83.3%. So, and then you look at the guys that are on the team that were from this time, from 2022 to 2024, or for 2022 and 2023, those guys in that class. And it's like Ben Morrison, Jalen Sneed, Billy Shrouth, Ashton Craig, Eli Reardon, Cooper Flanagan, Jaden Greathouse, Jeremiah Love, Jordan Faison, Christian Gray, Adon Schuler, Drake Bowen, Jaden Osbury. That's like the core of the team. And Morrison is the only guy who's gone, right? Because he's a 3-and-out guy, right? Yeah. So obviously they are set up really well. And I mentioned those freshmen who played a big deal. That doesn't even include guys like Boubacar Traore and Charles Jagasaw, who would have been obviously in the 200 snap list. Yeah. They would have absolutely made the list. And they might have the highest draft ceilings out of all those guys, with the exception of Jeremiah Love. Yeah. Right. So they're in a pretty darn good spot where what they have in terms of like core guys that are probably going to develop are on the path to becoming NFL players, or at the very least multi-year starters. Like, so when you think about that and what they kind of have coming back, so what they have for 2025 and 2026, like, because most of these guys have 2 or 3 years left if they want it. And really the only guy who's like a slam dunk, well, if he stays healthy, whatever, right, would be Jeremiah Love. He's probably going to be a 3-and-out guy, right? Most of those guys are going to be around for 2026 as well. So they're set up incredibly well. And if they leave because they transfer, it's because somebody younger came in and beat them out. Like that's what it'll come down to. So it's a good time to be a Notre Dame fan because they are really, really set up well going forward. And you look at like those first, few recruiting classes that Marcus Freeman has put up, like they got a lot of really great players there. Right. And obviously some of these guys weren't as highly ranked as other people. And we mentioned about all these guys who were the breakout guys for next year, who are probably going to be like, guys like Kennedy Urlacher, Luke Talich, Kirby Lambert. All these guys could be in the 200 snap club next year. Like there's a bunch of guys like that, right? Kedron Young, right? Like all these guys. So they are just in a really, really good spot going forward and of how they've kind of built the team. And if you look at where, they're probably going to have some freshmen be surprises and show up and be like, wow, this guy's ready to play too. Right. So
they've had it every year.
They've had it every year, right? They've had it every year. So it's just one of these things that like, it's not even being, you could say like, hey, this is like I'm sure someone would paint it as like being an Andy Homer. It's like, no, these guys have already played and played well. It's not, you're not just, you're not wish casting these guys. They're just good.
Well, so sometimes you have a situation where it's like you play a lot of young players And it's like, well, they played they because they had to, right? Well, you play a lot of young players on a 14-2 team that, played for the national championship, right? So clearly you're talking about like quality production, quality players. You're a part of a really good team. It's one thing to be like 5-7 or 6-6. It's like, oh yeah, well, we had to play a lot of youth, and it's like, okay, maybe, right? And so, but you can always kind of get into the conversation of, well, is it because they were good or is it because they had to, right? I think it's pretty clear that Notre Dame was good. And just like it's not a tweet. Bill Connolly from ESPN, he put a message. He posted this stuff on Blue Sky. I don't know what those are posts. I don't know what those are called. Whatever. He's talking about Notre Dame.
Clouds.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm just making that up.
Yeah. He always goes deep into returning production around this time. Speaking about Notre Dame, he said, geez, I knew Notre Dame was pretty young in 24, but I didn't realize we were talking about returning 96% of carries, 67% of tackles, and 58% of O-line snaps, even with 2 starters transferring. So that includes Coogan and Spindler. And they're obviously a mystery at quarterback, but lots to like with Notre Dame's situation. And I think when Marcus Freeman speaks about like, we're going to major in recruiting, and minor in the portal, this is what he's talking about, right? Yeah. Like, this is actually, like, sometimes it's word speak and coach speak or whatever it may be. It doesn't really manifest itself. This is a situation where it absolutely has come to fruition for Notre Dame, and they can supplement their roster and the talent that they have with the portal, which they did last year. They're doing it again in 2025. They're not doing it at quarterback, but they are doing it in some key positions. Let's talk first about Malachi Fields and Will Pauling here. Okay. So Malachi Fields, 6'4", 220. He made Bruce Feldman's freaks list, which some of that stuff, grain of salt, because he's getting it from, it's not like this comes from combine numbers, right? It's not from, these aren't open camps. It comes from,
he's getting it from the strength coaches and people who work on the staff at Virginia.
Some of these things don't necessarily play out when they go to the combine, right? In terms of,
I would say most of the time they do, though. I would say
it's in the right direction. Just some of the numbers aren't.
Some of them are a little bit like, wow.
No one's like a complete dud, right? Like, they're usually you're usually a pretty good athlete if you make the list. But Malachi Fields, all right. So he comes to Notre Dame with those numbers, 6'4", 220, freaks list. He could clearly run too. Like, you could just watch it on tape. This guy's got some juice. He's a really good athlete. 129 career catches, 1,800 yards, 11 career touchdowns. I'm curious about what you look at as far as a player like him. Obviously, the contested catches, 23 contested catches on 47, 47 opportunities. So that's just under 50%, which you like. That's a good percentage for him. I'm a big yards per route run guy.
Yeah, it's a good stat.
Yeah. So basically anything over like 1.5 is probably about average. Anything close to 2 is good. Anything above 2, you're really cooking. 2 yards per route run for Malachi Fields, 1.85 for him in 2023, which basically just says, like, look, are you out there like running a bunch of routes and you're not getting the ball thrown to you? And if you're the main guy, like, that's kind of red flaggy. So last year, Bo Collins was like 1.3, right? Some of this is the style of offense, right? But I think, like the best I think Notre Dame had from the boundary receivers, Chase Claypool was 2.48 in 2019. That's kind of the bar. But what is your take on Malachi Fields? Like, I think a lot of people feel like this could be the best kind of portal wide receiver Notre Dame's ever gotten. I'm thinking something along the lines of like Kevin Austin in 2021, like second half Kevin Austin 2021, would be a good outcome for Notre Dame.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Is that kind of what we're looking at here in terms of like what Notre Dame can expect, what fans can expect, what they want to get from him?
I mean, I think that would be ideal if they could get that. And I think that's, that's kind of the hope that you're getting there, because you're getting a guy who, had he's got production, and you mentioned all those numbers, but he's got like just overall production in the ACC for over 2 years, right? Like he's a guy who's made plays against, and he's not racking up all his numbers against, when they're playing the group of 5 teams and that. Like he had a 100-yard game against Louisville this year, right? Like he had a couple 100-yard games versus ACC competition. He had 81 yards versus Notre Dame. I know one of them was kind of like probably
not
a
a
drop,
catch,
whatever, but like he still had the other one that was explosive where he beat, he was lined up in the slot, had a nice little run after the catch on a slant where he broke for over 20 yards on an explosive play.
Yeah.
And he was, by the way, was very good in the slot, average over 20 yards per reception when he was in the slot. So that's something to think about. So like, I think he's a guy who's like, he's a chess piece. You can kind of move around. I mean, try to put a nickel on this guy, if he is a guy, definitely, I think if you kind of move him around, how, Mike Denbrock loves that slot matchup, right?
Yes.
So you get a guy like him on a safety there. You get him on, match him up against a smaller corner. That's a guy that, should win. But he's also a guy who's like, he's fast, right? And he's built very similar to a Chase Claypool, right? Like, so he's got that kind of, physical freakishness. He's got a lot of that to him. And I think one of the things too, when you look at like some, he obviously has those numbers, like you said, to use on the Feldman's freak list, but he had these like very markers in high school in terms of his track stuff too, that also project to it. So it's like easy to say like, that's probably legit. Right. And it's also kind of like translated on the field. I think he's played in like a bad situation. He's, he hasn't played with very good quarterback play. I mean, obviously Notre Dame saw their quarterbacks this year, wasn't great. He wasn't the guy who got to benefit from playing from now the guy's name escapes me, the guy who was transferred to NC State, the lefty.
Oh, the quarterback.
Who was there before when they put up those numbers. He didn't get to benefit from that. Like he was the guy who played after that and didn't have just a lot of great quarterback play throwing to him. And especially this year, he was just like the only guy. So he was getting a lot of like, bracket stuff and they were, because he's Brendan Armstrong. Thank you, Chris. He's the one guy on the team that it's like, well, can't let this guy beat you. Can't let this guy beat you. Right. So, now, I mean, certainly he could be a wide receiver 1 for Notre Dame. He has that kind of potential, but it's like, if you kind of overplay him, it's like, well, you kind of see when like a guy like Jaden Greathouse can do. And it's like, well, obviously you got guys like Faison too. We'll see with some of the other receivers, right? Obviously, Will Pauling we'll get into a second, but like he's set up where he's got a lot more surrounding talent. He's obviously got the backfield talent there too. Quarterback play obviously is a question. We're going to wait to see what's there, but like, I don't doubt if like Steve Angeli wins the job that's going to be a better quarterback than he got for him last year. Right. So it's like, I think that there's a lot of reasons to be optimistic that he's going to have a really, really great year for Notre Dame. My only kind of like caveat with that is that I do look at some of the stuff where, what guys do against man coverage and whatever. He didn't have like great numbers against man. Certainly he didn't see a ton of man. He wasn't targeted a ton in man. So, obviously, depending on who you're going to play, that's going to change and it can, it can be tweaked with and stuff too. So, and certainly there's this other stuff too. That's like, when we talked about some of the stuff like the match man cover 4 stuff, whatever, and it can all get, a little bit confusing in terms of like what is man and what isn't when PFF is tracking those numbers. But he hasn't quite been a guy who's just like flat out dominated and been a dominant guy like Claypool in 2019.
Yeah.
Even really, you could say like like Austin at the back end of things. Is go back and look at like Austin in that second half of the season, like you said, Greg. He was like a problem. Like corners were like, oh, I gotta like bail hard because they didn't want to get beat over the top, and he was like winning after the catch with his strength. And I understand why he left, but he would have had a monster year if he would have stayed one more year, because I really think he just needed reps. He needed something, and I really think that's probably, if he probably would have stayed, I think would have been overall better for his football career in general, because the guy just needed
he's
more
not in
reps.
the sport, right?
Yeah, he just needed more reps. So I think, Fields, definitely has that potential, and I think at the very minimum, his like floor, he's an extremely high floor guy. His floor is higher than anyone they've had at Boundary since Austin in 2021, and that's pretty darn good.
And I would say, like, to the point, like, he hasn't shown the ability to do the things that Claypool did in 2019, but Claypool didn't really show that either until that last season, where he like completely took the next step, kind of similar to Boykin in that, and similar to Kevin Austin as well. Like, and this is kind of like, and this is very topical, Jamie. I'm telling you, 6 Thoughts on a Thursday was a banger. Continued development is something that is just because you are one thing at this point in your career doesn't mean that you can't continue to grow on that thing. And this is something that Malachi Fields does have he has the tools for it. Like, he does have that. You can see it happening with him. You can see it happening with Claypool. Now he has to do it. It's not enough to say it's there and he could, right? It does have to happen, but it did happen with Claypool, right? It did happen with Miles Boykin. It did happen with Kevin Austin, near the end where Kevin Austin kept developing, right? And I think Malachi Fields has that opportunity as well. The numbers are good on him, like the contested catches, like that's good stuff, right? He hasn't had a ton, and he hasn't had the greatest quarterback play either. And some of those other guys, like, they were coming from much better situations as well. So with the exception of Boykin, like he didn't have a great situation in 2017 with Brandon Wimbush, and he did have that kind of 1 year where it all kind of clicked for him. But it's just like it was the last year, right? Claypool in his 4th season made it happen. The example you gave was kind of about like Xavier Watts, about how he took leaps and then leaps on top of that, right? That's kind of what Notre Dame is hoping for from Malachi Fields next season. And then Will Pauling going with him. He's another like really good yards per route run guy, right? 2 yards per route run last season when Wisconsin had some like really poor, I think he had some injuries. Wisconsin had some really poor quarterback play. Alex Van Dyke got hurt, and that kind of ruined everything that they were trying to do last year. In 2023, 2.07 when he had his best year, 73 catches, 834 yards, and 6 touchdowns. So look, you like those numbers. He's productive when they throw him the ball, right? And you love to see that. Or when he's running routes, like he's productive and he's getting open, and it's just like they're getting a lot of efficiency and production from when he's on the field. The drops are a huge concern. They just are. He's got 17 drops over the last 2 years. So you don't want that. But look, 11 of 21 contested catches in 2023, 7 of 16 last year. So he's got 18 contested catches on 37 attempts, which is, again, right at 50%, right what Malachi Fields is. So these are 2 good wide receivers who have done it in big time, kind of environments against Power 5 teams, or Power 4 teams, excuse me, which, no one had a better yards per route run last year than Chris Mitchell. He's coming from FIU. We saw it wasn't really able to translate it over to Notre Dame. I think we have a better feel for Notre Dame should be able to get a little bit more out of Will Pauling. They should, I don't want to say that. They should have confidence that they can get a little bit more out of Will Pauling and Malachi Fields as they come over from their programs.
Yeah, I mean, I would say so, and I think that one key too with Pauling is that he's a Mike Brown guy, like a guy who was recruited by Mike Brown to Cincinnati, left when Mike Brown went to Wisconsin. He went there with him, and then now obviously he's back with Mike Brown. So that's a guy obviously that he believes in his talent, and is a guy that obviously had he had his production went down this year. Some of it was quarterback driven. They lost their starting quarterback of the first 3 games. Tyler Van Dyke got hurt of the first 3 games. And then some of it, I think, was just like, I mean, Phil Longo just was not going good for them. They had problems with the O-line there, and they had a lot of different issues there. And the drops were a thing. But what I always look at with some of the drops too, and I always wonder this too, when it's like concentration drops, when guys are like dropping when it's like wide open stuff, you're like, why are you dropping this kind of thing? Like, it's different than a contested catch situation. I'm like, is that like honestly like, does this guy need to get laser eye surgery or is this whatever? Like, I'm serious. Like I
got you. Yeah,
it is a thing, I think, with a lot of guys, right? Where it's like, hey, maybe you didn't wear contacts before, or maybe you got to get a new prescription or something like, because honestly, like for someone to have, and the drops really went up this year, right? So I think that is something, I would say is there. And obviously you don't want someone who's going to, you want someone you can count on, right? But the thing is that he's got the production. He also, it's more of like a thing of like his ceiling and what he can do too, because he's a really like explosive, competitive, very competitive. I really like I like watching him play. Like he's a guy who like really competes hard, right? And I mean, he's a 600-pound squat, right? Like he's 15 reps at 225 for a guy who's like under 200 pounds, like 190 pounds. Like, he ran a 4.3940 at Wisconsin. Like he's fat, I think it's like 4.03 short shuttle. Like those are like elite testing numbers. Those are like, he is a very, very good athlete. So I think you're looking at 2 guys that are coming in there and they already kind of like, they check the boxes of NFL, like athleticism and all that. So that's great. Right. But you have a guy coming in who has production, should be more comfortable playing for Mike Brown. Also, Mike Denbrock, Gino Guidugli, like they know him. Like he was recruited when he was there too. So it's like, that's something that, they're very aware of as well. So I think if you're looking at a guy where his stock probably was down because of the season he had and the drop, but who could potentially have like a big bounce back and be like a way better player than he was last year, much closer to the guy he was in 2023, he would be on that list. And then I also think too, like if you're looking at like, if you're comparing him to say like Jaden Harrison last year, well, he is definitely like a more accomplished, more polished receiver than Harrison was, right? Obviously, he doesn't have the kick return thing, and that was a big part for Harrison. But like in terms of that, if you're looking at like kind of depth there at the slot, and yes, I know Bernie just is. Whenever Bernie's in here, this guy is pumping up guys.
Bernie gasses Notre Dame football.
Yes,
like no other.
Loves it.
And honestly, do you, man?
Yeah.
Love to see that.
Yes. We're not talking about the guys returning. Jane Greathouse, also guy, member of the 200 Snap Club. I expect Jane Greathouse as of today. I would say I would be surprised if he's not wide receiver 1 for Notre Dame next year. Like even with Fields coming in and whatever, like I don't expect like Pauling is going to beat him out at slot. Like I think he'll play there too. I mean, I also think like Greathouse might be someone you can move around and do some of the stuff too, because he's probably earned a little bit more.
Honestly, I think they're going to put Pauling to the field, to be honest with you.
Yeah, and then he could compete there with Faison, right? But I think if you look at it, it's just like they're adding these guys. I mean, Fields was a must in terms of what they needed at the boundary, but adding someone like Pauling that adds so much to be like, okay, well, now we're adding him into the mix with a great house, with a phase on. Obviously, we'll see what some of the other young guys do as well. But like you're adding that in there, like it's a good addition. Like it's a very good addition.
Yeah, to be honest with you, I don't think it would be the worst thing if Will Pauling beat out Jordan Faison for the field, because look, Faison is he's going to continue to play lacrosse as he should. Like I'm not one of the people who is like he needs to give it up, focus on football. I don't feel like that. I think he needs to, like, your talent is your talent, and play it at the highest level possible for as long as you can. And if you're if you're like top of the line lacrosse player, then continue to do that. To me,
he's a great lacrosse player.
Yeah. Right. So continue to do it. Like to me, his body is never going to get that big, and he's a guy where it's like I don't know that you want him to be an every down like field guy. He'll just break down. We saw it happen this year, and it's not that he, he got rolled up on or whatever. He got tackled weird, but it's like I just think that with his size, you're talking about 16 games now. Hopefully, right? That they want to play. They certainly want to play 13, 14 every year. Like, you need more like really good players out there. If those two are platooning, I think that's fine, right? I think that's a good situation for Notre Dame. And then Will Pauling also has some utility in the slot as well, right? And obviously we always want to see the young guys. We always want to see Saldate out there, right? You always want to see him out there. You want to see Mikey Gilbert out there. You want to see Cam Williams out there. But it's like you just got to get like this type of quality on your roster. Like, I think we all kind of fret too much about who's playing where and snaps and keeping everyone happy or whatever. Like, people talked in the chat about like define culture. Like, culture is getting everyone to buy into the role that they have. I mean, Jaden Harrison's like a perfect example of that. Comes in, he's not getting a ton of receiver snaps. When he gets in the game, he's making plays. And then in game 14, he makes one of the biggest plays of the season, returns a kickoff for a touchdown, right? And it's just like you need to just build up your roster with talent, all the talent you can. And I think that's what Notre Dame did here with Pauling. I think they did it with Malachi Fields. Listen, both of them have had better seasons than any Notre Dame receiver has on the Power 5 level or Power 4 level, excuse me. That's just a fact. So it's good that they added that to the roster. It'll just make the whole team better, and it'll make the quarterback room as well. You got to get that quarterback room going, as many weapons as possible. I think that's good for Notre Dame. So I'm not worried about if Pauling is going to play the field. It's like, what does that happen with Faison? They'll figure it out, especially over a 13, 14 game season, hopefully 15, 16. So on to the D-line. Let's go D-line next, Jamie. Jared Dawson. I was asking you about him. Just like, you look at his production, and for the amount of snaps that he plays, it's like, man, I can't believe he didn't play more. Like, was he hurt or whatever? You just talked about it's the way that the Louisville does their D-line rotation. 6'2", 305 coming from Louisville. And then Elijah Hughes from USC. I know you like him. You're listed at 6'3", 290. I know you're very intrigued by Elijah Hughes. And he's kind of a sneaky, what's Notre Dame getting here for me about just like, could Elijah Hughes be the one that is kind of the least talked about and the most impactful? So we're monitoring that situation because my man Yama knows the D-line play. But Jared Dawson, I mean, could he start for Notre Dame? Could he start over Gabe Rubio? Is that in the cards for you? Or is it just like those two in tandem, equal snaps, one gets 30, one gets 30, and we move on with our day? He's definitely used to that with what happened at.
Oh yeah, like I think like you said, when we're talking about like floor with these guys, and really too, that floor does matter, right? Like, it does matter because you want to get like at least something out of these guys, no matter what. Like, and the floor for him is to be like the third defensive tackle on the team, and be like a quality like rotation guy who plays a lot, like you said, and like splits reps, right? But like he's a guy who can play 3 tech, he can play nose, like he can move around. He's got disruptive ability. He was their best defensive tackle last year, and they were pretty good at defensive tackle. Like they were good on the defensive line the last 2 years, right? So he's very much like a guy who's like just built like a fire hydrant, just a total like he's 6'2", 305. So he's not like the longest, like freakiest guy in terms of like arm length and all that too. But he's got good hand violence. He's a guy who really like he's got a good first step. I think too, he's probably a better guy because he's not like I wouldn't say that 305. He's not like a svelte 305. Like he is a guy who is going to be better probably playing 30 to 35 snaps a game than he would be like if he's playing 50 snaps a game, right? So I think when he's doing that and then he can play at his like peak motor and all that, like I think that's something that he can really help. And he's a good pass rusher. Like he can redirect really well. So
28 total pressures in the last 2 seasons.
Yeah. So he's someone that I think is going to it's just like one of those things with like obviously it was immediate need to kind of fill in there. At the very least provides like quality depth. Could be like a pretty good starter. And I think his ceiling, I don't know if he'll get to this, but I'm just saying like out of guys that he kind of reminded me of that Notre Dame played, that other than obviously he played against Notre Dame, but other guys that, Notre Dame fans might know that he played against was the Ty West kid from Indiana, who was very disruptive in that game. Like he has very similar traits to him. So he could be a guy who really, really like is impactful for Notre Dame. At the very least, he's going to be someone who, immediately kind of plugs in and does well there for Notre Dame in their rotation. And Hughes, yeah. So you mentioned Hughes.
Well, answer this question real quick. A Rubio, 1 tech or 3 tech from Michael Hunt?
Oh, he's will line up and play 3 tech, but they shift guys, right? So it's like the one thing that's pretty common today in just like any kind of any defense too. There's so much stemming, which is like, when they do the shifting pre-snap, they call it stemming, right? So there's so much of that where you're lined up as a 3 tech and then you shift to like a 1 or a 0 or whatever. There's so much of like, based on the strength of and formations of what they do, you kind of moving around there. There's so much like movement in terms of like post snap of what you're doing, and there and all that means. So like, Rubio is probably a more natural 1 tech that plays 3 tech normally, because he was kind of like fitting in behind Riley Mills. He was like kind of like Riley Mills' backup, but I think he's more of like a natural kind of 1 tech because he's not a guy who I would say you line him up outside shade of the guard and he's not going to win as a pass rusher all that much. He's just a much better at the point of attack guy. Really does a really nice job against double teams, but also like, you get doubled as a 3 tech too, right? So he's a guy who will be listed as like a DT for them, but consider him nose as well. Like he can play both.
Yeah. Elijah Hughes. I know you're fired up about him.
Yeah. So he was someone that like obviously was not someone who was on the radar. And I remember when, I heard that, obviously right before it was like announced, we heard that like Notre Dame was getting him. And I was like, I don't even remember this dude. Like you play for USC, like you're thinking about like USC's defense tackles, which I do remember. There was, I kind of liked USC's defensive tackles last year. I kind of thought they were better. I kind of understood why Bear Alexander bolted, cause like this was a guy who was playing over Bear Alexander, by the way, who like everybody was, getting crazy over, former 5-star Bear Alexander, but like, I mean, his inconsistency probably just cost him, right? And Elijah Hughes, like, I watched, every single snap he took against Notre Dame on like the end zone copy, and man, I gotta tell you, he looked pretty darn good. Like I liked him. And I watch obviously a lot of other stuff. I watch his high school film stuff.
Yeah.
He is very twitchy. He's a guy who gained about 25 pounds over the last year to get to around that 290-ish range.
Mm-hmm.
He's long. He has real pass rush potential too. Just he's someone who's clearly as developing. And I would say that the USC did a good job developing him, because I just saw a lot of stuff that just technical wise in terms of how he's using his length to squeeze blocks and just play with his hands, and was good. He was looked like I just watched him and I was like, man, this guy's a quality player. He's a quality player who I think has a chance to get a lot better. And I think the one thing why I'm really high on his potential is because one, he has that thing of I always I'm like, a defensive tackle, you're either going to be just someone who is so friggin' strong and powerful that you can just win just on just length and power and just whatever, or you have just exceptional twitch and obviously length helps too, right? But exceptional twitch and lateral twitch, right? Because if you can do that laterally, you can win as a pass rusher, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's the thing that really stands out, and he's got that. He has that potential, and he's coming. He has multiple years left, so that's why I'm the most high on him. If he was coming for 1 year, I would be like, I mean, I don't know. He'd be like, well, we'll see what happens with him, right? And you're still gonna say you'll see what happens with him, but the fact that you get 2 years, with him, he's gonna be able to come in and I wouldn't doubt if he is a guy that plays a little bit at the beginning of the year and he's in there and he's in the mix, he's in the rotation, and then all of a sudden at the end of the year, you're like, oh wow, this guy's really coming on, and then all of a sudden next year you're like, well, he's going to be a starter for Notre Dame in 2025, and maybe be a guy who becomes part of the third down package. He's got you just look at him, he's got NFL traits. He has NFL
Mm-hmm.
traits, so he's a guy who's got really, really high ceiling. And I think, at bare minimum could be a rotation guy. So, I like him. I thought it was a kind of a savvy pickup for Notre Dame, because wasn't a guy who's in terms of transfer portal rankings, he's not getting a ton of transfer rankings, but I think he's all right.
And obviously Al Washington likes him.
Yeah,
because he saw the he saw the tape, right? And he saw how he performed against Notre Dame. He knows Notre Dame very well, obviously. So look, it's an intriguing take, right? And like you said, 2 years to kind of get him going. You gotta love that size, 6'3", 290. You just gotta get on a guy like that, right? Especially if you have the opportunity to do so. And it's good. They especially need it on the D line, and obviously, a lot of people are excited about Jason Onye being back with the team or working out with the team. Matt Freeman's been pretty. There are steps to take for him, so that's an unknown, right? So it's good to have a body like Elijah Hughes with the upside that you're talking about in the event that it doesn't work out with Onye, and he has, like you said, he has another year, so that'll be very beneficial to the interior of the line. I feel like they do need a flyer there, just because, look, D-line hasn't, especially on the interior, right? It just hasn't hit. Notre Dame's got the edge. They've really hit on their edge guys with Boubacar and Bryce Young, Josh Burnham, guys of that, guys of that ilk. But, it remains to be seen what they've got with the D tackles. And you've got some misses. People talk about Brendan Vernon all the time. People talk about Devin Houston all the time. You've got some misses in there. You can kind of make up for that with a guy like Elijah Hughes has multiple years of eligibility. You don't want to miss on your D line, but you don't have to miss with your media company, Jamie. You don't want to miss there either, and you don't have to do that when you go with VSR Media. They can hook you up with a highlight reel if you're an athlete. They can hook you up with something for your social media page. They can hook you up with something for your small business if you want to put something online. A lot of small businesses are online right now. So you can go to VSR Media, of course, founded by Notre Dame football pregame host and Emmy award-winning anchor Vahid Sadrazadeh. VSR Media provides professional and cinematic video and photo, whether you're looking for a collegiate or pro-level highlight reel, have a personal story to tell, or aiming to diversify and grow your business. VSR Media specializes in short and long form video storytelling, social media management, and website design. VSR Media also captures professional headshots, senior and sports photos. Contact them at vsrmediacompany.com. Mention Irish Sports Daily and get 20% off your first project. Visit them online or give them a call at 574-800-9106. I think of all the portal guys who is just like, he's going to come in, you know how it's going to work. We've seen how it works, and it's just going to be, I don't want to say seamless, but it's going to be good, is nickel Devontae Smith out of Alabama. He's going to play nickel for Notre Dame. He's played nickel for Alabama. He's played a bunch of snaps for Alabama. He was injured, or else he was going to be their main guy. You mentioned Nick Saban really likes him. If Nick Saban really likes him, you bring him into
Seems
your
to know
program.
DBs pretty well.
You bring him into your program, and listen, he's a good football player. He plays exactly how Notre Dame wants their slots to play. He can play man. He can play press. He plays with an edge. He's got the body for it to be a good blitzer. I mean, he's going to be their nickel. He's going to start at nickel. They had Thomas Harper. They had Jordan Clark. Now they got Devontae Smith. What do you want to say about that?
Yeah, I loved him as a recruit. Like, I was a big fan of him as a recruit.
Yeah.
That was a guy that I thought, he was just like, for all the kind of reasons that you said too, and he was just like a very instinctive, like you could just tell he was a smart football player. And just thought that he was a guy that would immediately, like, he's just like one of those guys you just want to have on your defense for multiple reasons. And he was the guy who has experience at safety, and he probably would have played more safety the previous year, but he got injured. So that was kind of, hurt his career. So that's why he's kind of only a 1-year starter, but he is, this isn't a guy who was like, losing his spot. Like, he was the guy who was a starter at Alabama. First of all, you're getting a guy who's a starter at Alabama. It's pretty good. It's
kind of crazy, actually.
It is kind of crazy, right? So it's like, obviously that's a guy that can play. He can play anywhere, right? He can play on any team. He can fit on any roster. And Mike Mickens was really liked him as a recruit. Obviously, Mike Mickens, pretty good at judge talent. Was someone that they wanted at Cincinnati, then wanted at Notre Dame as well. And I think he's someone that like, out of all the guys, I mean, you feel really good about a guy like Malachi Fields. It's tough to say that he has the highest floor out of everyone. I get it, right? But if I was going to say, like, just out of the other guys, people maybe like don't know as much about, or maybe don't have like the total production, the guy that I kind of feel the best about, like, I feel like this guy is going to be a very, very good player for Notre Dame. Also ran a ton of match coverage when they're, Nick Saban's defense, obviously, going to run a ton of match in Chris Ash's defense. So I think he's going to be a great fit. I think he's going to be a really, really good fit. And man, just, they've been lights out with the nickel and what they've done there. And I think they found another good one.
Yeah. Alabama does some of the most exotic stuff in the back of any team in college football. If you're starting for them, and even being in that system, right? So obviously it changes a little bit when Nick Saban leaves. But being in it for as long as Devontae Smith was, like, you have to learn so much. They play some of the, like I said, the most exotic kind of pro style coverages that there is in the sport. So from that front, the transition for him should be seamless. And it kind of goes to show, like we've been talking about, like, it is such a, like, for an Alabama starter to come over to Notre Dame. Because look, if he wanted to get out of Alabama, he could have gone to Texas. He could have gone to any of these, like Washington. Like, he could have gone to any of the others, like,
He can go to anywhere he wants in the SEC and whatever.
Right,
Yeah, like
very pro DB schools, right? Like, he could have gone to Georgia, right? He wanted to go to Notre Dame because of the type of defense that they run. It's a very attractive defense if you're a DB. Very, very attractive, right? So, and this just kind of goes to show that, right? He's an SEC starting caliber nickelback. It's a huge pickup for Notre Dame. And it's like, because it's so kind of just like obvious, you don't really need to go that much into it. So we'll move on to Jalen Stroman, the safety from Virginia Tech. He was injured last season. He got injured in the I think in the opening game, and he was lost for the year. Here's the thing about him is I think he doesn't have the greatest numbers, right? But he physically, like, you see it from him, right? And when you're playing for Virginia Tech, I think there was a lot of, like, kind of, I don't want to say turmoil, just unsettledness within their defense and what they've been trying to do. Not the greatest operation over there in the last few years. And I think with him, what happens is, we talked on Tuesday a lot about Kennedy Urlacher and Luke Tolich, them wanting to come in. Maybe Bronte Johnson, like, is he going back to safety? And obviously Devontae Smith has some safety background as well. But it's like Jalen Stroman, what he does is he sets the floor at, this is what the Notre Dame safety is going to be as a floor, right? To be better than this, to start, you need to go above that. And that is obviously going to be a very high level player for Notre Dame. Jalen Stroman himself could be a high level player for Notre Dame, right? So I think that is why this is a very good move for Notre Dame, because it allows them to say, this is how good our safeties are going to be going into the season. It needs to be elevated above this level. And if it does, Notre Dame's got a very, very good player at safety next to Adon Schuler. And Adon Schuler is a very good player himself, right? But Jalen Stroman, 6'1", 200. So what is your kind of take on Jalen Stroman and what he brings to the defense?
Yeah, I think it's very, much similar to in the same vein as Devontae Smith and, Jordan Clark and Rod Hurd last year, right?
Yeah.
Like, you're taking a guy who has played, has experience, physical, plays with an edge. You always like to add those guys to the defense.
Yeah.
Because right away, those guys make an impression, right? Those guys make an impression. And obviously we know that is kind of how Notre Dame defense in general is. There's just a ton of guys who play with that mentality, that physical, violent mentality. Obviously that's what Marcus Freeman loves. So that's something that I think that stands out about him, right? And he's a guy who, ball production, yeah, he doesn't have like the ball production that you'd like to see, but he was, third on the Virginia Tech in tackles in 2022,
right?
Fourth in 2023. Like, he's been productive in that way. Like, he's a good player for this run, matched up well with tight ends. Considered a very smart player. Well, had a guy who had a draftable grade going into the season last year. Obviously got hurt, so he didn't go to the league, right? So I think whenever you're looking at guys, you want to add guys that you think have the potential to be an NFL player, right? Because if you're not doing that, then that you can't compete with like the teams that when you're getting to that high level, right? So I think, like you said, he sets the floor and he'll come in, and it's going to be about like whether or not he can earn that job or somebody else kind of beats him out. Obviously, that was the thing with Rod Hurd. It was like, well, Rod Hurd, probably could be the guy playing opposite Xavier Watson. Obviously, he did play some of it, but Schuler beat him out because he was too good, right? So that's, I think, what you're kind of looking at is like the bare minimum is kind of like that kind of level of like contributions of like a Rod Hurd. Well, can he be as good as Rod Hurd? Because Rod Hurd was very good. I don't know. We'll see. And like John Apiro said, he's got to stay healthy. Yeah, that's got to be a thing. But I mean, that's a thing for all these guys, right? Because it's
Right.
like most of these guys, part of the reason why they are going to Notre Dame, like other than Fields, part Pauling was the same thing. He was like banged up last year, missed a couple games, was playing hurt for much of the year. But you're not taking guys assuming they're going to play hurt. Also, when you're going into the college football playoff, you have to have guys who will play hurt, because if they don't play hurt, you're not going to be able to play, right? Like that, everybody's hurt at the end of the year, right? And like that was certainly the case with like Watts, Jordan Clark, a bunch of guys, for Howard Cross, like all these guys. You're playing there, and you have to be able to play, like even if you aren't like at the same level that you normally are, you have to still be able to play at a pretty high level by playing hurt. And that's honestly that is a big difference when you're getting into these things. It's like you're getting to like the championship rounds. It matters, right? It matters. So I think he's a tough kid, high IQ kid. I think it's another kind of nice addition, not because we're always looking at these guys. They're like complementary players. He's not coming in expecting him to be Xavier Watson, an All-American, right?
Yeah. And the good thing about the thing about Hurd was like he was smaller, right?
Yeah.
And so that was kind of like Stroman doesn't have that problem. Like he's a bigger guy, right? So physically you can kind of see where that goes. And obviously he's, like you said, he's got to stay healthy. I mean, they all got to stay healthy, right? It just is what it is. But if for whatever reason he wasn't able to, like you still have, you still have you still have Kennedy Urlacher, you still have Luke Talich there. I believe they're going to play. I think they're going to play a lot next year. Honestly, at least one of them is, like, in my opinion, definitely getting the 200 club.
Yeah.
At least one of them, and non-special teams, like actually on defense. Jason Smith said, I wonder if there's a good picture out there of Adon's hit on ETN that caused a fumble. Actually, there is. There you go, right there. It's as good as a photo as you'll see of that. Our guy Rick for ISD. He's on it. He ISD Images Rick on Twitter. You can follow him there. He absolutely kills it. Rick Kimball. He does a great job with all these photos, and it's really good stuff. All right, moving on to Ty Washington, tight end, out of Arkansas. But man, at the time, I think everyone was kind of like, what is this is an interesting take. Then Cooper Flammang tears his Achilles in a playoff game, and suddenly this is like a stroke
necessary.
Like really, really. I mean, imagine had the portal passed and they hadn't taken the tight end, and then Flammang gets hurt. I mean, they'd be in a really bad situation. Now it was a necessary gain for Notre Dame. I think there's some I think he's a good blocker, and I think there's some really good upside for him as a wide receiver as well. So this is at the time it was kind of like, oh, interesting take. Now huge take for Notre Dame at tight end with Ty Washington.
Yeah, I exactly like you said. They needed someone who could play to add depth there, because also if you want to be a team that plays in 12 personnel, in 13 personnel sometimes too, like you got to have enough guys. And we mentioned how like Jack Larson, it's going to be like a big spring for him. We don't know how Jack Larson is going to be, and if he's going to be at a position where it's like, man, you can really count on this guy as a blocker. And certainly I wouldn't expect him to be the level of Cooper Flammang. And I don't even know if it might be a lot to ask to say Washington's going to be the level of Cooper Flammang, but as a blocker, but I certainly think he's going to be a capable blocker. And he's also another guy with, he's going to have multiple years, there. So he's a guy who has a chance to kind of really develop. Obviously, Notre Dame and Mike Denbrock know how to develop tight ends. So that's something that I think is just like, it was important for them to get. They were losing so many guys, not just Mitchell Evans, like, Bauman and Sherwood, who didn't really play, but they always had those guys there as like options and bodies. And really they just were lacking there. They needed to get there. They hadn't, it's ironic that Holden Stays, like if Holden Stays would have stayed, he would have been in a good position. Like he would have been a really good position, but obviously he was, I don't know, looking for more opportunities or whatever. And I mean, and he obviously chose wrong at first. And anyone could tell you, you just look at Tennessee's, what their numbers for what they do with the tight ends, like you weren't going to get a lot of balls thrown your way. So we'll see, you know, what happens. Obviously he's at a new school now, but like, I think it's a good opportunity for Tyus Washington. Another guy that, you know, obviously these kind of things are important to know these guys beforehand, to understand like what they are. There was like a thing with him getting dismissed from the team. And obviously there was context added to it because of what was going on in, you know, with his family at the time.
Yeah.
And it was, you know, like he wasn't in a good like mental health space. But when you have like Denbrock had like recruited him at Cincinnati, obviously also Mike Denbrock, pretty good evaluator of talent when it comes to that kind of stuff too. So
the tight end specifically.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's huge for Notre Dame. He's gonna play a ton of snaps. The Holden States thing, I don't kind of one of those like, man, that was not the greatest decision in hindsight. But whatever. I mean, good luck to him. You know, he's at Indiana now, so hopefully that works out. And the final player they brought in, the kicker, Noah Burnett from North Carolina, 49 of 62 for his career, 79%. 17, you know, 2 of 2, 17, 12 of 18 from 30 to 39 yards. You'd like that to be a little bit better, but like most of those misses are in 2022 as a freshman, right? So the last 2 years, 7 of 9 from 30 to 39 yards, and 11 of 14 from 40 to 49 yards. And look, Marty Biaggi was a kicker, so he knows kickers. If he likes them, you take them. You know, it's a kicker, right? You go in and you get a kicker, and hopefully he works out for Notre Dame. You know, Mitch Jeter had a better pedigree coming in, but you know, I mean, he got hurt, so that kind of affected that whole thing. But
when he was healthy, he was great.
When he was healthy, he was good, right? And obviously, he kicked the game winner in the. I mean, he missed the field goal in the championship game, and you don't like that, but he did kick the game winner to send them to the championship game. So I would say that definitely worked out for Notre Dame. So that's the portal class, Jamie. And like we said before, they're building onto an already solid foundation with what they have coming back. They didn't take a quarterback. They got to get that figured out. They've got Angeli, they've got Minchie, they've got Carr. It's going to be a very, very tightly watched battle in the spring, and that's going to be fun to watch. But look, Notre Dame's, they're going to have a good football team. They've got a lot of good talent on this team. I think what they added only adds to the kind of talent that they have in their ceiling, the type of team that they can become, right? There's some leadership things that got to get figured out, right, with this team, but you kind of trust that it will over time. They're going to be good, man. They're going to be explosive. I think they have an opportunity to be more explosive in the passing game than they were this last year, which is probably the biggest thing. Obviously, you have Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price as your running backs. Those are two explosive players, especially in Love. He might be one of the most explosive players in college football next year. So it's going to be very exciting. So, what do you want to say?
Well, I just wanted to mention, because I just totally forgot, because we got into it deep, but there's somebody who asked way early in the chat. You don't have to find it, Greg, but
okay.
like if I was the Steelers, which Notre Dame guy would you want to draft? And I mean, for me, it would be Ben Morrison. Like, I mean, everybody needs corners, but Ben Morrison, I think, is one of these guys who obviously steps in right away, and he's a day one starter in the NFL. And also a guy I think probably could play nickel in the NFL too, right? So it's like, even if he's not playing outside, he certainly he would have been an unbelievable nickel if they needed him at nickel as well too, right? Like, I think he's, you know, someone, when he's had to cover out of the slot, he's been very good. So I don't know where he would kind of fall off the board, and obviously his testing is going to matter. But if he tests well, I don't see why he should be moving up draft boards if he tests well at the combine. Like, that is 100% there. And then the other guy would be Riley Mills, because Riley Mills is, they run a 30 front. Like Riley Mills is one of these guys who can play like multiple alignments, do things. I think Riley Mills, I don't know what his status is going to be for next year, because I don't know really the extent of what his knee injury was.
They never told us, did they? Well,
they never said. I will probably find out, and at this combine. I hope it wasn't ACL, maybe it was MCL or something like that, and it wasn't whatever. But that's probably not going to help his draft stock. But that he's a guy that if you can get like later on because of it, like I think he's a guy who could end up being a steal like later on if you get like a late round Riley Mills, take a flyer on him. Like I think he's a guy who could play in the league for many years.
Yeah. What I'm hearing from you is that you don't value safeties, and that's unfortunate.
I think Xavier Watson would be a no-brainer. I just don't think I just don't know if that is where their kind of like needs are the most based on who they have. And I think I just the corner kind of aspect of it. If you had a choice in a first round pick, because I think Ben Morrison. Maybe I'm wrong, but I just think, if he tests well and all that, everything checks out, I think he's going to be a first round pick.
Yeah.
So, and I think Watts, because he's a safety, I mean, hey, man, I would love if they got, sign me up for BMO and Xavier Watts as Steelers. You get them, round 1 and round 2. Would love that. Would absolutely love if the Steelers did that, but we'll see what happens.
Yeah. It doesn't matter because he's going to go to the Ravens and he's going to play next to Kyle Hamilton, a program that does value safety play. So congrats to the Ravens.
I mean, the Ravens, you can't knock their drafting. They've been unbelievable.
Congrats to the Ravens for that. I'm very excited for that. All right, we can end it there. Thank you everyone for tuning in today. If you like what you heard, please hit the like button. Please hit subscribe. Please hit the notification bell. So whatever it is, we are going live. We'll be back next week. Monday for Power Hour with Mike, and we'll do that. And then on Tuesday, we'll be back for Hit and Hustle. So subscribe to the channel. Don't miss the show. All right. Have a good weekend, everyone. We'll talk to you soon. Keep hitting and hustling.